July 28, 1999. It was a Wednesday. The number one hit song in the U.S. was Genie in a Bottle by Christina Aguilera. The president was Bill Clinton. The Sixth Sense was the most viewed movie, and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling was one of the best-selling books. If you like video games, you were probably playing Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness, or Acromage. But for one sweet little girl, she played her very last game on that very night. Hello and welcome back to Where Have All the Children Gone? My name is Allie, and this is podcast number 4 of the Children Who Kill series. This podcast seeks to portray the truth and provide the victims a voice. It contains graphic and mature themes which some might find offensive and is not recommended for young children. This case was preventable at so many levels. It's a case that really upsets me, and I'm going to be a little bit more opinionated than I normally am, but I am discussing the facts. I apologize in advance if I offend anyone. The case of nurture versus nurture has been argued for decades. But most feel, although one may be born with a predisposition to be evil, it doesn't have to be that way. Nurture is defined by dictionary.com as to support and encourage during the period of training or development, to foster, rearing, upbringing. It's this side that creates killers out of children because no one helped them make better choices. Parents who abuse or neglect. People who know a child is being abused or neglected but turns away saying, "It's not my business." I'm asking my listeners to think back on who helped you turn around and make good choices in your life. Because it comes down to choice. These kids all had a choice. The right, the power, or the option to make the right choice instead of the wrong one. I know I'm not the only person who went through abuse, neglect, violence, but decided I wasn't going to pass this on to the next generation. I made a choice to take the higher and usually the harder road to make a difference in the lives of those I come in contact with. I'm not saying I don't have issues, but so does everyone else. It's a choice to try harder, to work through the adversity, and not repeat our friends' or our family's mistakes. Each of us has something we hang on to that is our rock. Mine is my Lord Jesus Christ, without whom maybe I would have gone down the wrong path. But whatever or whoever it is, we all have something. Think of the pain and hardship you went through. Some of it helped build you into the person you are today, but I bet all of you can think of a kid you know who is crying out for help, of a mentor to put them back on the right track, to show them that although selling drugs is easy money, holding down a job can build your confidence, shape you as a person, give you an identity, and provide independence. You don't have to save the world. If you can reach out and reach one kid and turn them back onto the right path, those kids will pay it forward over and over. I'd like to see our churches and youth groups offer some type of after-school programs where our children can be safe and away from the bad crowds. When I was in El Salvador on a missionary trip, the church I stayed at held a soccer game every night to keep the kids away from selling or processing drugs. And even the families got involved. They would come, cheer their kids on, and some would even join in. On the night we had church services, they fed everyone who were hungry, both spiritually and physically. When I was young, the entire neighborhood looked out for the children on their street. These are some good examples of stopping evil before it starts. So with that being said, here is Murder Isn't Child's Play. Two women, Tiffany Eunick and Lionel Tate, both grew up in Jamaica and were friends. Fast forward a few years, both find themselves living in the United States, where they rekindle their friendship. They catch up on old times, have family get-togethers. Kathleen Gossip Tate, a single parent, is a CHP officer and a proud mother of a 12-year-old Lionel. Tiffany Eunick has a lovely, bubbly 6-year-old daughter named Tiffany she's raising alone. Lionel Tate, born January 30th, 1987, to Kathleen and John Tate. Lionel's father was in and out of jail for drug-related offenses, and soon his parents divorced. John isn't actively a part of Lionel's life, even when he is out of jail. Rather than being cared for by his mother, Lionel was left with various relatives after his parents' divorce. On this night, Denise has to work and needs someone to watch her daughter. She asks her friend Kathleen, who agrees to watch Tiffany. Kathleen feeds the kids dinner, sets them in front of a television set, and goes upstairs to take a nap, leaving a 12-year-old boy alone to watch his 6-year-old neighbor. Unfortunately, this 12-year-old isn't an average responsible 12-year-old. This 12-year-old is a 166-pound school bully who is obsessed with worldwide wrestling and slams kids around in school. He has an 8-year history of major behavioral problems, including fighting, assault, lying, and stealing, with 15 school suspensions. Lionel is described as bright and street smart. When he caused trouble at school, Kathleen would show up to the school wearing her state trooper uniform to intimidate the principal and deny Lionel caused any trouble and insisted he was blameless. On this night, once Kathleen fell asleep, Tate asked Tiffany to play a game. She's very trusting, she's only 6, and doesn't hesitate to agree, not knowing it's the last game she will ever play. Lionel Tate grabbed little Tiffany and started slamming her head and body against the wall, against the coffee table, and against the floor. He ignores her cries to stop, and when his mother heard the coffee table crash, she yelled down and told him to knock it off because she's trying to sleep. Afraid Tiffany would tell, he proceeded to stomp his heel over and over in her stomach multiple times to shut her up. There was also a report that stated he launched himself from a stairway, landing on Tiffany. Whatever it is, the effort seemed to work because she stopped crying, exchanging the cries to stop for a continuous moaning. Once again, Kathleen awakes, hearing this moaning noise. She yells down, asking, What is that noise? Lionel says, It's Tiffany. Kathleen states she thought it was just Tiffany moaning in a dream. Rather than check on them, Kathleen just yells down and threatens Tiffany that, quote, if she doesn't be quiet, she's going to come downstairs and beat her butt. It's unknown if Tiffany was alert enough still to understand this threat, or if Lionel helped her stay quiet by doing something else violent to this poor child. What is known is Tiffany urinates herself and stops making that noise. Most likely, Tiffany is dead. Lionel leaves her and goes back to watching television. Roughly 45 minutes later, Lionel goes upstairs and wakes his mother, telling her Tiffany isn't breathing. Now, one would have thought that Kathleen, being a cop, pledged to protect and serve, would be devastated about what her son had done and would feel great remorse for negliging and not watching the children, knowing her son's proclivities for fighting. You would have thought that once she saw Tiffany beaten, unconscious, lying in vomit, bleeding from her eyes, nose, and ears, she would have done everything to help Tiffany, her, quote, best friend's daughter, unquote. But you would be wrong. Now, it was sometime after 11 o'clock that night. Like, why weren't the kids in bed? In Kathleen's statement, she states she ran downstairs and finds Tiffany not breathing. She states at that time she calls 911 and tries resuscitative measures. Also during this time, Kathleen, Lionel's mother, calls Denise Eunick at work and asks if Tiffany had any breathing problems with asthma in an attempt to shift the blame, because she wasn't breathing. When the paramedics arrive, Kathleen tells them that she thinks Tiffany may have had food poisoning from dinner and that she vomited. There was no mention of the fact that they all ate the same thing or that her son slammed Tiffany around and stomped on her belly. There are no public documents that state in what condition the paramedics found Tiffany, but it makes one wonder if Kathleen cleaned up some of the blood on Tiffany and made sure her clothes didn't cover up all her bruises, because since when did normal food poisoning display itself with bleeding out of every possible orifice? Now, Kathleen, she was an officer, and she knows the symptoms. She knew Lionel was guilty of murder. When the cause of Tiffany's death is determined as blunt force trauma, Lionel is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that Lionel Tate was responsible. responsible for his actions, and also knew that he had done was wrong. For instance, when the police came to arrest Tate, he protested that all he did was give Tiffany a bear hug. Later, he confessed that he had attempted to throw her onto a couch, but missed, and instead threw her onto the banister of the stairs. As he was pressured to tell the whole story, more horrors were revealed, which could lead one to think that this schoolyard bully knew his level of violence had been way over the top, and he knew he had been hurting this tiny little girl, and he killed her to shut her up. When fellow officers came to the home to show their support to Kathleen, they noted there was no disarray at the home, the washing machine was running, and they could smell a strong odor of bleach. Now a child has died, and there will be an investigation. In this day of CSI, forensic files, and other crime shows, anyone would have known not to have touched anything, left all items in place where they were, where they found them, even the trash left by the paramedics until the scene was cleared and released by the police. But Kathleen, Lionel's mother, a police officer, knowingly and willingly cleaned up the crime scene, even going to the extent of using bleach before the scene could be assessed by homicide investigators. Which bodes one major question. What were you trying to hide? One might be able to understand a mother wanting to lie to protect her son, but resign your shield. I found one article that stated Kathleen was looked into for child neglect, but they stated there was not enough evidence to support the charge. Are you kidding me? Luckily for Tiffany, the scene would expose truth about what happened that night. Tiffany Eunick recalls when she learned that Lionel actually killed Tiffany, her reaction was shock. She said, "It was just devastating, really, really devastating." To add injury to insult, her best friend won't, or more likely isn't able to talk to her because her son was charged with Tiffany's murder. The isolation for her is devastating. She just wants her best friend to acknowledge her son's at fault and that he's sorry. Now, the prosecution offers Lionel a fair deal. To try him as a juvenile would have just given him a very short period of time in juvenile hall, and it just wasn't fair for this type of heinous murder. So what they offered him was for him to serve 3 years in juvenile detention, followed by house arrest and probation. It wasn't really harsh enough for the brutal slaying, but he was only 12, and the prosecution wanted to provide a punishment that would at least give Lionel time for reflection about killing Tiffany without totally taking his life too. But Lionel's mother took this show of compassion as a show of weakness and declined the offer multiple times. Lionel's mother, Florida State Trooper Kathleen Tate, claims that her son was just playing with Tiffany and that her death was just the result of a tragic accident. She tries to confuse the real issues by grandstanding on talk shows, drumming up sympathy for her son. Lionel's mother thinks her son shouldn't receive any punishment for killing Tiffany because he's 12. And I don't think that if it had been the other way around and Tiffany had killed her son, that she would feel the same way. Kathleen again tries to shift the blame to the Worldwide Wrestling, stating it was their fault her son learned these moves. My question is, where was the parental supervision of this 12-year-old regarding the television watching habits, if this was such a bad influence? Where was the education that this isn't true, that this is not real wrestling? No, she just turns a blind eye and just tries to blame someone else. Right before trial, Tate's mother again turns down the plea bargain arrangement that would have allowed Tate to only serve a 3-year term for second-degree murder, but she insisted on going to trial on hopes of an acquittal. January 2001, Lionel is charged as an adult and goes on trial for first-degree murder. The defense states Lionel was just playing with Tiffany and had accidentally killed her while showing her professional wrestling moves he said he had seen on television. The defense even made a video demonstrating the moves he tried to do in an attempt to support his claim. However, the video still showed a lot of violence, and also the video showed inconsistencies in his story, such as The corner that he said he was trying to throw Tiffany into in the video was virtually impossible because the corner had a treadmill, and the jury did not believe Tate's story because there was just multiple inconsistencies, and so this only made his case even worse. The prosecution presented to the jury evidence that Lionel wanted to get rid of Tiffany because he had a crush on her mother. Mrs. Eunick Paul testified that she had told Lionel that her daughter was dead. He shrugged and rolled his eyes. The very next day, he asked Mrs. Eunick if he could live with her and have Tiffany's toys. The coroner's report states the cause of Tiffany's death was blunt force trauma, but she had 35 different injuries. Lionel Tate, who has a reputation as a schoolyard bully, injured her little body to the extent that she bled from her mouth, her nose, her eyes, and her ears. Her skull was fractured in several places, and her ribs were cracked. Part of her brain was flattened inside her head. The beating Lionel Tate gave her was so severe, a part of Tiffany's liver broke loose and was floating free inside her body. The beating was so severe, they likened her injuries to her being dropped from a 3-story building. Defense attorney Williams pleaded with the judge for leniency, blaming Tate's criminal behavior on his upbringing. The death of Tiffany Eunick would never have occurred if there had been proper parental guidance and control. Yeah, now they say it. 6-year-old Tiffany tragically died while roughhousing with a 6-year-old boy and a 12-year-old body. During the trial, Lionel's mother sticks to her story that she initially thought Tiffany had food poisoning. Again, despite they all ate the same food and no one else was ill, she contends she gave life supportive measures, but there was no evidence this occurred. Now, where does she mention remorse for her neglect for leaving them alone unsupervised, not checking on them when she heard a crash, nor when she heard Tiffany moaning, nor when she discovered the true reason of Tiffany's death and tried to cover it up? All she did was admit the threat she made to Tiffany when her moaning awoke her from her precious sleep. What about this precious child? Tate claimed he was mentally ill from years of abuse by his mother. He claimed he was hearing voices and contemplating suicide, a story he later admitted was a ruse. The judge said Tate had shown disdain and disrespect for the law after repeated opportunities to redeem himself. Now, Tiffany's mom, a Christian woman, said it was difficult, but she forgave Lionel. She also stated during the trial, "I want him to be rehabilitated. We won't know if he's rehabilitated if he doesn't get a chance to show us," she said. "I would like him to have a good life." This coming from a woman whose daughter was brutally murdered by this thug. In 2001, Lionel Alexander Tate, at age 14, was the youngest American citizen ever sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the 1998 battering death of 6-year-old Tiffany in Broward County, Florida. In sentencing Tate to life imprisonment, the judge, Joel T. Lazarus of Broward County Circuit Court, said the acts of Lionel Tate were not the playful acts of a child. The acts of Lionel Tate were cold, callous, and indescribably cruel. It was much to their surprise when Judge Lazarus treated them, the mother of Tate, the lawyer, and Tate himself, to a 45-minute tongue lashing in which he excoriated them for their separate roles in completely trivializing a human life. One of his statements was, "Tiffany who? Wasn't she the annoying little screamer with blood leaking out of her eyes?" End quote. He also stated, quote, "I have a strong feeling that I could point to the exact reason why Lionel Tate earned his reputation as a playground bully. Mothers like this one are as much as a menace to society as the evil spawn they raise to prey on the rest of us." End quote. Whew. I agree, but that must have been pretty hard to hear. So, what happened after the conviction? After the conviction, the prosecution openly joined Tate's plea for leniency in sentencing and even offered to help his appeal. The trial judge had criticized the prosecution for compromising the integrity of the adversarial system and said that if the prosecution felt that life imprisonment was not warranted, they should not have overcharged him with murder in the first place. Unlike Lionel's mother, John Tate, the boy's father, stated his son needs to be punished. But the sentence he's been given is excessive. John Tate also said he couldn't believe the boy's mother turned down a plea deal that would have put the boy in juvenile detention for 3 years, followed by house arrest and probation. Defense attorney Jim Lewis appealed to Florida Governor Jeb Bush to see if Lionel Tate's sentence could be commuted to a lesser prison term. Pending that hearing, Governor Bush ordered that Lionel be housed in a juvenile lockup. Some might even think this could be considered protective custody to keep him away from his own mother, the person who has both loved him and failed him the most. In January 2004, a state appeals court overturned the conviction on the basis that his mental competency had not been evaluated before trial. This opened the way for Tate to accept the same plea deal his mother originally turned down. Tate was released on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years probation. On September 3, 2004, Tate was arrested for violating the terms of his plea agreement when he was found out of his house and carrying a 4-inch knife. On October 29, 2004, Tate was placed on zero-tolerance probation for an additional 5 years for the parole violation. On November 30, 2004, Tate was allowed to return to the home of his mother, Kathleen Gossett Tate. The family that he'd been staying with had asked him to be removed because frequent visits by state probation officers were too stressful. On May 23, 2005, Tate greeted a Domino's pizza delivery man, Walter Ernest Gallardo, with a handgun outside a friend's apartment after phoning in an order. Gallardo dropped the 4 pizzas and fled the scene. Tate then re-entered the apartment, assaulting the occupant who did not want Tate inside. Gallardo called 911 upon reaching the Domino's store and returned to identify Tate. The sheriff's office said in a statement, no gun was recovered. Tate was charged with 1 count of armed burglary with battery, armed robbery, and violation of probation. Kathleen Tate then hires 2 South Florida private investigators who alleged DNA evidence as well as 2 new victim statements proved Tate didn't do the actual robbing of the Domino's pizza man, but rather a 14-year-old boy whose apartment they were in did the robbery. A probation hearing was set for December 5, 2005, but it was postponed when Judge Lazarus announced a hearing scheduled on December 19th to decide if Tate is competent to stand trial. If found incompetent, he could be hospitalized in a secure state facility until doctors believe he is able to participate in his own defense. Tate said nothing in court. Now, if you remember, this is the reason the judge did this is because the other was overturned based on that his mental competency was never evaluated. So they did that at this point. On February 19th, 2008, Tate pled no contest to the pizza robbery and was sentenced to 10 years. There was much argument as to if Tate actually did the robbery, but it didn't matter because any sentence he receives would run concurrently with his 30-year sentence for violating his probation for the possession of a handgun. I found quite a bit of documentation that noted that the gun Lionel may have used would have been his mother's off-duty pistol. Kathleen Gossett Tate, a 9-year FHP veteran, didn't alert her bosses that in 2005 her .40 caliber Beretta was found stashed in the bedroom of one of her son's friends. According to an internal investigation, the weapon was discovered by Lionel's friend's mother and Kathleen was called to retrieve it. While Gossett Tate was disciplined for that incident, the inquiry included she acted properly when she immediately reported the gun's disappearance after her armed son's robbery arrest in May. The service weapon was one of 3 guns discovered missing from the Broward Sheriff's Office. Deputies searched her Pembroke Park home. Kathleen Tate's Beretta still hasn't been found. The reprimand will go on Kathleen Tate's employee file. The only positive note on this case is there was documentation that after Lionel went to prison, Kathleen and Denise have mended their relationship and are helping each other heal since they both have lost a child. Special thank you to ABC.com, CBS.com, SunSentinel.com, National Organization of Victims of Juvenile Murderers, or NOVJM, Murderpedia, CNN.com, Fox.com, Project 21 Black Leadership Network, and WordPress.com. Please feel free to send me feedback as to what you like or didn't like, or any other true crime stories related to children you'd like to hear at truecrimechildren@gmail.com. You can also leave any adult true crime stories you would like to know about, because when I set up my Patreon section sometime in the future, I'll address those there. Again, you can send me those stories at truecrimechildren@gmail.com. See you next week for It Should Never Have Been Hammer Time. Good night, and stop evil before it starts.